What's up, Boiler Nation? JT Boiler here, and today we are breaking down Purdue Football's 2025 schedule, looking at where we might win, where we might lose, what those matchups might look like, and much more. And so as we start, we're looking at Purdue's just kind of schedule overall here and kind of how things are looking. Off the start, lots of new faces here in West Lafayette, right? Brand new staff with head coach Barry Odom coming from UNLV, bring offensive coordinator Josh Henson, who was previously the OC at USC, defensive coordinator Mike Scherer coming with him, and most of the staff coming with him from UNLV as well. The only holdovers or only people we're still going to see that were at Purdue last year on the coaching staff that are still here are going to be Lamar Kennard, the running backs coach, who was a former Boilermaker himself, who played at Purdue, was a huge part in keeping running backs like Devin Mockabee here for this season. And then also Kiero Small, the strength coach, is still going to be here as well. And so those are the only holdovers. When we look at actual players, there are 82 new players on this Purdue football roster, both walk-ons, high school recruits, transfers, everything. So the vast majority of players you're going to see this year are going to be brand new. We have one returning starter on the entire team, and that is running back Devin Mockabee. So brand new season. Last season, really hard to really use that as much of a guideline because this is going to be pretty hard to predict who's even going to play, let alone how they're going to do and how they're going to mesh together. That being said, we're going to try our best today. When we look at Purdue and where they are right now, when we look at what Vegas has projected for them, they are at a 3.5 win total, which means they expect them to win 3.5 games, right? So you can bet over that. There's a 39.4 chance that they think that Purdue will win more than 3.5 games, so win 4 or more, and a 70.1% chance that they go under that number and win 3 or less. When you look at the big picture, there are some really small numbers that show they have a 0.2% chance to make the Big Ten championship and then a 0.1% chance to make the national championship. That being said, if you are a Purdue fan, we all know that those two things are not going to happen most likely, and we'll be happy if we can hit 5-6 wins this season. Would be amazing. So we're going to go through each game one by one, break down kind of the other team and what we might think, and see which games will win, which games will lose. Purdue's first football game of 2025 is against Ball State at home. Ball State is going through a really similar situation as Purdue, where they fired their head coach last season after a 3-9 season in 2024. New head coach Mike Yarmovich from Butler was brought in. He brought his entire staff with him, and they are installing a quarterback run-heavy offense at Ball State. Last year at Butler, they had over 1,200 yards rushing and 21 TDs just from the quarterbacks alone, and that's where quarterback Kiel Kelly is going to slot in perfectly at quarterback one for Yarmovich's first year. He is a guy who has played quarterback, running back, wide receiver, DB, everything you can think of, and all over the field for Ball State these last couple of years. They expect to slot in at QB1 there and run the ball and pass it a little bit for Ball State. On offense, they don't have a ton of returning production outside of Kelly, who did not start for them last year. They have one returning star on O-line. Running back, wide receiver, everywhere else is going to be full of transfers. One familiar face there is running back Elijah Jackson, who was at Purdue the last couple of years and has transferred to Ball State. He was a walk-on at Purdue, got a scholarship at Ball State. You probably remember him from him returning a couple of kicks and also a long touchdown run in Purdue's lone win of 2024 against Indiana State last year. On defense, they have Joey Stemler, who's a junior linebacker who is projected preseason second-team All-MAC, so he's a veteran guy who's pretty solid. And redshirt sophomore Darren Conley is a pass rusher who really came out over the stretch last year and is looking to be first-team preseason All-MAC. So they've got a couple key contributors, but once again, lots of transfers coming in other than those guys, and lots of kind of younger and experienced guys that might be returning otherwise. So they're in a pretty similar position to Purdue, and because there's a difference in conference and quality, right? Barry Odom is coming from Mountain West. Yarmovich is coming from the Patriot League. The quality of athletes, the quality of coaches, everything. I just expect Purdue, despite them being, also going through a hard reset, to be able to come out on top here. Vegas has them as a 16 to 17 point favorite this time, and I think that's about right for this first game. Purdue's second home game is a night game. They'll be playing against Southern Illinois in week 2. Southern Illinois is an FCS team, but they're not necessarily one to sleep on. Their coach, Nick Hill, has been there for 10 years. They are a preseason top 25 FCS team. They are in one of the best conferences in the FCS with the Missouri Valley Football Conference, and they're not too bad. Their quarterback, DJ Williams, was doing really well last year before he broke his hand in week 3 against BYU. He had 120 rushing yards and 2 TDs. So he's a guy that's another dual threat guy they'll be faced with early and kind of test Purdue's defense in that way. and we'll see where they end up. Southern Illinois is projected to get 7 or 8 wins in the FCS, and ultimately, just like I said with Ball State, due to the level of athlete, the level of coach, everything we see at such a high level of football like the Big Ten, Purdue should be able to handle this one pretty easily, but you never want to sleep. Southern Illinois has some guys on their team and has a veteran coach, but it should be all right. Purdue should be leaving week 2 2-0. Week 3 is when stuff starts to heat up for Purdue as they face off against Lincoln Riley and USC at home. USC went 7-6 in 2024. They went 4-5 in the Big Ten Conference, so kind of a under expectation year for them. However, they did end up switching midway through the season from quarterback Miller Moss to Jaden Maeva, and Maeva went 3-1 as a starter and really did pretty well for the most part. Maeva might be familiar to Barry Odom's staff also because he was the quarterback for UNLV Barry Odom's first year there before transferring to USC. Ultimately, expectations are a little bit higher for USC this season. They received some votes to be a top 25 team in the preseason, but ultimately did not get placed in there. They, I think, are going to have a really good offense. Lincoln Riley is a quarterback whisperer. He is great at coaching offense. And if he trusts Maeva to be the starter and not go out and get somebody else, I think that probably means he's going to be good for this season and going to have a pretty solid, strong year at quarterback. He also has great targets to throw to. Jacoby Lane and Mekhi Lemon are two of the better wide receivers in the country. They had a lot of guys who left USC to go to other places at wide receiver who ended up are starting other places as well. It's a pretty deep room. And then at running back, they are replacing a lot of production. I've heard a lot of buzz through some people about running back Wayman Jordan from JUCO, actually, who they think is going to be pretty solid. But they have a handful of names there as well. O-line is always going to be solid, even though it's not coached by Josh Henson anymore now that Henson's at Purdue. The defense is kind of the question to me. They've struggled a little bit with physicality, with toughness, throughout time during Lincoln Riley's tenure there. And I think that kind of is the question. And I think that is kind of the area that Barry Odom's team might be able to have an advantage. I think, hard, smart, tough is the way he coaches, the way he is. And I don't think those are just words. I think it truly is the mentality and the way Purdue is going to be this year. I think they're going to be structured, disciplined, tough. And sometimes that can keep you in games even when you don't deserve to be. Now, that being said, I think USC is, especially on offense, a really talented team. It's going to be hard for Purdue to keep up with them. If they want a chance to win, it'll be because of turnovers or even like special teams plays, as I think Purdue have pretty good special teams this year. But we'll end up seeing how things go. As it is right now, I'd have to put this one down as a loss if I'm being realistic for Purdue in week 3. So 2-1. Purdue hits the road for the first time in week 4 to face off against rival Notre Dame. They're going to South Bend to face the preseason number 6 team in the nation. They're obviously coming off a great year, right? They made the national championship. They went 14-2 in Marcus Freeman's third year, so they're looking to follow it up with another strong year. They lost defensive coordinator Al Golden to the NFL, but they took Chris Ash from the NFL, from the Jaguars, to be their new defensive coordinator, so they still should be pretty strong there. At quarterback, there's no more Riley Leonard. It's either going to be Kenny Minchey or CJ Carr. Minchey, a little bit more athletic runner-style quarterback. Carr, a little bit more of a traditional passing-style quarterback. Both athletic, though, and can do a lot of different things. They also have running back Jeremiah Love returning. Love was a little banged up at the end of last year, and he was still amazing, carrying them to the national championship at times. And so he comes back this year and is one of the players that you should keep an eye out for as a Heisman candidate, if that tells you anything. So on offense, they should still be good. Run heavy, I think, whether it's Minchey or Carr in there, with a strong O-line, strong running back room, always have good tight ends too, so they should be good there in that sense. The question is, how developed can their passing game get with one of these two young quarterbacks they decide on? On defense, they are 23rd in returning production, so they should be solid there as well, even though they lost several guys to the NFL. Now, as it goes in the season, they're going to have played 2 games before it comes time to play Purdue. They're going to play Miami and then Texas A&M. So those 2 young quarterbacks will have a lot of experience most likely by then against high-level teams. They don't just have a bunch of FCS teams early on. They have had real games by this point, so they should be ready. Once again, I think this is one that Purdue is going to struggle to be super-duper competitive in, and I think that's just because of the quality of Notre Dame's O-line and running game and also their defense behind such a strong defensive-minded head coach in Marcus Freeman. So leaving week 4 on the road, Purdue's probably going to be 2-2. Week 5 sees the Boilermakers returning to Ross A to play against rival Illinois for the Cannon. Last year, Illinois was a great team. 10-3 in 2024, ended up their season beating South Carolina in their bowl game, has come back. They are ranked number 12 in the preseason for 2025. So expectations are pretty high. And the reason for that is because they return so many players. They have 16 returning starters here in 2025. All 5 of their starting offensive linemen, their starting quarterback, and several people on the defense side of the ball as well. So Luke Altmaier's back. He was a great quarterback, one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten returning this year. On defense, they have stud Gabe Jackus returning as well, a linebacker who's a preseason All-American, had 74 tackles and 8 sacks last year. They stole the starting D-line from Wisconsin and have had great reports from them, essentially, coming off this camp season and stuff. So Illinois' expectations sky high, as they should be. Lots of reasons for optimism in Champaign. That being said, this is Illinois versus Purdue for the Cannon in Ross-Ade. Anything is possible. Purdue was 1-11 against a ranked Illinois team last year and it went into overtime, right? So anything's possible. I'm not going to say that Purdue is going to beat them. I'm not going to, put that down as my projection, but Illinois should be watching their step here as they walk into Ross-Ade. 2-3 though for Purdue. In Game 6, the Boilermakers hit the road again to go play PJ Fleck in Minnesota. Flex Minnesota teams have really become a lot of what Purdue is probably looking to emulate, where they are kind of consistently in that bowl contention range, making bowls 5 of the last 6 years. Good running game, solid defense, all those kind of things that lead to a stable, competitive team in the Big Ten. Now, in 2025, expectations are a little over the place. They don't have a returning starter at quarterback. It's going to be redshirt freshman Drake Lindsay, who the staff really likes and you've heard good things about, but it's hard to project a guy with very little to no experience as a Big Ten quarterback and knowing how he's going to do. However, they do have an experienced player coming back at running back with Darius Taylor, who nearly hit 1,000 yards last year, and with a solid O-line and the way they run the ball in Minnesota is expected to this season most likely. On defense, they have a star player in safety Coy Parrish coming back, who had a good freshman year last year with 4 interceptions. This year they've even talked about him kind of playing both sides of the ball and special teams and all kinds of stuff. So it should be an interesting year for Minnesota, but ultimately their ceiling and floor all kind of stays in that same range because it's a PJ Fleck team. And I think they're going to be anywhere from 4 or 5 wins to 7, 8 wins. It's hard to say. Now, Purdue has done pretty decently against Minnesota. And I think this is actually one that Purdue could shock some people. I think they're actually decently similar teams. Just Minnesota is a little bit more experienced in bringing back people versus having a million transfers with experience. They don't know how they're going to mesh. And just due to the momentum and things how they've gone, I think this is one that I'm going to call for the upset here and say Purdue gets their first win on the road against Minnesota in Week 6, bringing them to 3-3. For Game 7, Purdue hits the road again to play against the Northwestern Wildcats, led by head coach David Braun. Last year, they came off of a 4-8 season, not really doing too hot. They went into overtime against Purdue, if that tells you anything about how good they probably were. But this year they have an upgraded quarterback. That was kind of their biggest struggle in 2024, I think, was the quarterback position. And now they have Preston Stone in there, who is the transfer from SMU. Stone played a good bit at SMU, who was a college football playoff team last year. He started off the season competing with Kevin Jennings for that QB1 spot, ended up losing out, and now is out and here at Northwestern. Decently highly rated guy, though. Should be someone who has a really solid season for them. I don't expect him to be a world beater. They don't expect him to be bad either. They also have a lot of depth coming back at running back, but no kind of one guy that stands out at that spot. On defense, they have a really experienced D-line coming back with 3 guys who started 8+ games last year, and then another guy who was reserve, who ended up being an all Big Ten or all mention as a reserve. So D-line should be a solid spot from them, both from a chemistry standpoint and talent standpoint. At linebacker, they're also a pretty set. They bring back their returning tackler from last year, who's going to be a redshirt junior, I believe. They also bring in Yanni Karloftis, who I know Purdue fans probably have a mixed opinion on, but I think in a more traditional scheme where linebackers are used for playing the run and maybe guarding people in the middle rather than playing man on a running back at times, I think he could be a really successful player in that sense, and so they should be pretty strong there as well. Ultimately, I'm not really a David Braun believer. I don't think he's going to end up being that Northwestern long term. However, I do think coming off the win and just kind of with the experience they have at D-line and linebacker, and I think Purdue's going to be a pretty run-heavy team in 2025, I think the matchup doesn't actually lay out all that well for the Boilermakers, so I think they end up losing this one on the road against Northwestern, taking them to 3-4. So after the stretch of road games, Purdue comes back home to play against the Rutgers Scarlet Knights for Game 8. Rutgers the past 2 years has been 7-6, which is a really solid record, but they have a really tough schedule in the Big Ten this year. So it'll be interesting to see how they kind of are by the time they get to us. When we look at their roster, they bring back quarterback Ethan Cali McManus. He had 2,700 yards passing, 16 touchdowns, 7 interceptions last year. He's a really solid quarterback. He's really likely not going to be an all Big Ten level guy. However, he is solid. He's not going to lose you the game. He can pass the ball. So he's, got more than Purdue is coming back with essentially at this point. Now, I think his ceiling is lower than what Purdue has at quarterback, but his floor is way higher. At running back, they lost one of their best players in 2024 in Kyle Monungai. He's in the NFL now. They have a transfer from FAU who had around 800 yards last year that's supposed to help supplement his loss. And they have another guy in the room that had around 400 yards. So that replaces his 1,200 yards he had last year. So running back room should be good. But once again, not as much star power, a little bit more relying on the whole room. Wide receivers, pretty strong. Once again, no stars. On defense, the defensive line, they did bring in two good transfers at the end spots. They're going to rush the passer. On the inside, they bring back their interior defenders as well. But linebacker is a pretty weak spot. If you look at PFF and you look at what they did in the transfer portal, it's a spot that they're probably not going to be all that great, most likely. And on the defensive end, on the defensive back end, they bring in all new corners and safeties to the transfer portal. Now, Purdue's doing the same thing. It's hard to project those guys. They all are kind of solid transfers, but not stars once again. And so I think this is a team that ultimately is going to be kind of same as Purdue due to the fact that they're going to have a bunch of guys across the field who are experienced, who are decent, but might not be all Big Ten level star guys, right? And so I think it ultimately kind of comes down to momentum and home field advantage and all kind of things like this. When you look at Rutgers, they're going to win their first 3 games of the year. They have all Group of 5 teams and FCS teams and stuff like that. But then they get into their Big Ten schedule. They're playing, I think they're playing Minnesota. They're playing Iowa. They're playing Washington and Oregon before they get to us. I think there's a good chance that Rutgers starts off 3-0 and ends up 3-4 by the time they get to us. And if that's the case, you saw it last year with a team like Purdue, where when you are losing games in a row, the morale can slide, the momentum can slide. And I think if Purdue is staying competitive, they might have the advantage here, both because projected wise, right, they are 3-4 versus 3-4, even schedule, but momentum wise, Purdue would be ahead if that's how they actually end up. Also, it's at home for Purdue, so I think home field advantage helps them out, and I think Purdue gets their 4th win of the season here in Week 8, keeping them in contention for a bowl at 4-4. After that, they're back on the road to play Michigan in the Big House. Michigan last year went 8-5, which was a little below expectations for Sherrone Moore, but they ended the season really strong with the bowl game victory over Alabama, which is a huge deal. They got a new OC this offseason with Chip Lindsey. They're also going to be breaking in a new quarterback, which was their biggest struggle last year. They were 129th in total offense, and the majority of that reason was just because of quarterback play alone. And so quarterback is likely either going to be true freshman, 5-star stud quarterback Bryce Underwood, or senior quarterback Mikey Keene. Now, if you remember a couple years ago, Purdue lost to Fresno State at home. Mikey Keene was the quarterback there. So he's a really experienced guy, played a lot of college football, but Bryce Underwood has a huge ceiling, could be an amazing player, and so we'll see who's playing by the time they get there. Either way, I think they're both going to be solid quarterbacks for them. And on offense, their O-line, as always, is going to be really strong. They recruit really well. The talent there is incredible. I don't think they have an insane amount of talent at wide receiver or running back, but they're still above average in the Big Ten. And with that offensive line, they're going to be a solid offense to control the game and do what they need to do to win games for sure. Now, in the defense, they're going to be really good. They recruit really well. Their defensive front, so when we talk about like the line and linebackers, is going to be some of the best in the entire college football. And so it's going to be hard for Purdue to run against this team. They're going to have to match up with athletes that can truly play against them. And sometimes that's just difficult. Like I talked about against Ball State and SIU, Purdue just out-athleting them at times and being able to just have more athletic, bigger, stronger guys. Likely just due to the way they recruit, Michigan might do the same thing to Purdue here this year. Now, on the defense, their secondary is not as proven as the front 7, but they still are pretty talented. It's still Michigan. I still have high expectations for them this year. So ultimately, this is one that I don't really feel like I need to go too deep into the matchup for because I do think this is a loss that Purdue has to take. Purdue has had some all-time classics when they play against Ohio State at home. However, for Game 10 in 2025, I don't think we're going to see one. Ohio State is coming off of a national championship in 2024. Ryan Day seems to really be hitting his stride. They have stars coming back on both sides of the ball with Jeremiah Smith on offense at wide receiver and Caleb Downs at safety on defense. They also have a guy that we all know pretty well in Max Clare at tight end. So they have a bunch of weapons on both sides of the ball. They have a ton of talent. They're coming off a really good season. Their only really question mark is who's going to be the starting quarterback. You have between redshirt freshman Julian Sayin and then a little bit older redshirt quarterback in Lincoln Kindholtz, who is a little more athletic versus a little more pocket passer with Sayin. However, both are extremely talented, former 5-stars who are going to have a bunch of weapons and a great offensive line around them. Purdue, once again, similar to Michigan, but just even more intense. I think it's going to be hard to compete with offensive line, defensive line, and just the skill positions they have with such good athletes that they recruit Ohio State. They are truly the best of the best you can get in college football, comparable to a school like Georgia or Alabama and how they recruit. And ultimately, with this sort of year one transfer portal cobbled up roster. I think it can be competitive, but it's going to be hard to compete with a team as talented as Ohio State, and this is going to lead Purdue to being 4-6 at this point. So after a couple games against the Big Ten's elite with Michigan and Ohio State, Purdue has to travel to the West Coast to play Washington at Washington. Washington was 6-7, losing their bowl game in 2024 in their first year in the Big Ten under Jed Fish, which is also a new coach. Year two, they're looking at Damon Williams as the new starter at quarterback. He's a young guy who started 2 games for him last year and did pretty well, completing 80% of his passes, and also is a pretty good athlete and runner. They also bring back Jonah Coleman, 1,000-yard rush from last year. They bring back Denzel Boston, the leading wide receiver in receptions, yards, touchdowns, all those things back this year. Now, their O-line was a little questionable last year, and they brought in some upgrades, but I still don't think they're going to be all that great there. But overall, their offense has some good pieces, should be pretty talented, and I think they probably will put it together to have a decent season this year. Defense, they bring in Ryan Walters, who, if you're watching this and you're a Purdue fan, you should probably know as a defensive coordinator. Now, your opinion on Ryan Walters can vary a lot if you're a Purdue fan, but as a DC, he was pretty good at Illinois. We're going to see how things go for him at Washington, especially because it's a pretty much a reset at defense. There's not a lot of key contributors back. There's no star preseason All Big Ten, preseason All American kind of guys there. They have a lot of guys coming in from the portal to fit this new scheme. So we're going to see how things go from there. Ultimately, after this rough stretch, I don't see Purdue going into Washington and winning. I think the offense for Washington will be really good. I think the defense will be serviceable, and I think Purdue will probably come away from there at 4-7. The final game for the Boilermakers in 2024, since they no longer are eligible for a bowl, as of my projections at this point, is going to be at home against Indiana. So this is the classic old oak and bucket rivalry. Happens at the end of every year, right? And obviously, most of us probably know the story. Indiana was the surprise darling of last year, making it to the college football playoff, kind of out of nowhere, and thrusting Curt Cignetti and the Hoosiers onto the scene, making them a national story for all of 2024. Here in 2025, they have pretty high expectations as well. They brought in a pretty good transfer portal class led by quarterback Fernando Mendoza from Cal, who is really good, prototypical 6'5", kind of modern quarterback who has high expectations as well. They bring back Kamara on the defense, who is a stud pass rusher, and they have a pretty good transfer portal class, like I said. So they have decent expectations, pretty easy schedule as well. This is one that I think they are more talented than Purdue's roster at this point. They also have a little more experience, but it is a rivalry game. And despite the odds, despite what you would expect, I think Purdue is going to upset Indiana just for the fun of it, just because. And I think that, it might be the game that takes Indiana out of the playoffs, just because that's what I want to optimistically think, and that's what I'm going to pick. And so with that, Purdue ends up at 5-7 in 2025, beating Indiana, taking some momentum with them into the next season, helping them out, get a strong transfer class, helping them, build some momentum towards something strong in 2026. And that is my optimistic homer projection. So there you have it. Year one in Barry Odom's tenure at Purdue, I have the Boilermakers going 5-7, which I think is a huge upgrade from the last year of Ryan Walters. And ultimately, 5-7 is a great space to go for it moving forward. I mean, missing out on bowl eligibility stinks, but it still is beating the expectations, not being last in the Big Ten, doing all of these things. And is this a homer prediction? Yes. This is JT Boiler, right? I'm a Purdue diehard. I am going to always drink the Kool-Aid and root for my Boilers. Now, do I think I reasonably kind of picked this? Yes. The only one I think that I chose that I didn't truly believe that Purdue could probably win or will win is going to be the Indiana game. But that is a rivalry, and I would love for that to happen. So I'm kind of manifesting it. Let me know what you think. What am I crazy for? What should I have said instead? Let me know in the comments. Let's talk about it, debate it, discuss it. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. Boiler up.